The scream that shattered the afternoon air at Riverside Elementary's playground wasn't the usual sound of children at play. It was raw, terrified, and filled with a pain that made every adult within hearing distance freeze in their tracks. Jaden Williams, all of 11 years old, hit the asphalt with a sickening thud as Officer Patricia Hawkins, known throughout the neighborhood as Hoa Cops for her relentless harassment of the community's families, pressed her knee into his back. "I wasn't doing nothing." Jaden's voice cracked as he struggled beneath the weight of the uniformed woman who had materialized seemingly from nowhere. His Spider-Man backpack lay scattered beside him, homework papers dancing in the October breeze like fallen leaves. The other children stood paralyzed, their game of tag forgotten, their laughter replaced by the kind of silence that precedes a storm. Just moments before, the playground had been alive with the simple joy of childhood. Jaden had been it in their game, chasing his best friend Marcus around the jungle gym with the kind of boundless energy that only comes after sitting through 6 hours of fourth-grade lessons. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the worn equipment that had seen generations of children play. Mrs. Chen from the corner store had been watching from her usual spot on the bench, smiling at the familiar sounds of young voices carrying on the wind. Everything changed when Officer Hawkins' patrol car pulled up to the curb with its engine rumbling like a mechanical predator. She emerged from the vehicle with the purposeful stride of someone looking for trouble, her hand already resting on her radio. The children's laughter began to fade as her presence cast a shadow over their game. "You!" she called out, pointing directly at Jaden. "Come here. Now." Jaden looked around, confused, his small chest rising and falling with exertion from the game. "Me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't play dumb with me, kid. I saw you playing too rough with these other children. Someone's going to get hurt with that kind of behavior." Mrs. Chen rose from her bench, her weathered hands gripping her purse tighter. She had lived in this neighborhood for 37 years, had watched Officer Hawkins patrol these streets for the past 5, and had seen this scene play out too many times before. Always the same pattern, a minor infraction, an escalation that seemed to come from nowhere, and a child who would go home that night with more than just scraped knees. "Officer, they're just playing tag." Mrs. Chen called out, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had witnessed injustice too many times to stay silent. "It's a normal game. No one is getting hurt." Officer Hawkins turned her attention to the elderly woman with the kind of cold stare that had become her trademark in the neighborhood. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back and let me handle the situation. This child was exhibiting aggressive behavior." The word aggressive hung in the air like a challenge. Jaden, who had never been in a real fight in his life, who still slept with a stuffed elephant named Peanut, who cried when he accidentally stepped on ants, suddenly found himself labeled as a threat. The other children began to back away, sensing the shift in the atmosphere like animals before a storm. "I wasn't being aggressive," Jaden said, his voice trembling slightly. "We were just playing tag, like we always do. Marcus was it. And then I was it. And then—" "Don't lie to me, young man. I observed you pushing and shoving other children. That's assault, and it's not going to be tolerated in this community." The absurdity of the accusation would have been laughable if it weren't so terrifying. Jaden's eyes darted to his friends, looking for support, for someone to explain that this was all a misunderstanding. Marcus stepped forward, his voice shaking but determined. "Officer, Jaden wasn't pushing anybody. We were playing. It's just a game. Son, you need to stay out of this unless you want to join your friend in the back of my patrol car." That's when Jaden made the mistake that would change everything. He took a step backward, not in defiance, but in fear. It was a natural, instinctive reaction to a threat. the kind of movement any child might make when faced with an adult who seemed intent on causing harm. But Officer Hawkins interpreted it as resistance. "Oh, so you're going to run from me now," she said, her voice rising with the kind of artificial authority that masked deeper insecurities. "That's what I thought. You kids think you can just do whatever you want with no consequences." What happened next unfolded with the horrifying speed of a nightmare. Officer Hawkins lunged forward, her hands reaching for Jaden's thin shoulders. He tried to dodge, more from instinct than intention. But she was faster. Her grip was iron-strong as she spun him around, and before anyone could process what was happening, she had forced him face down onto the asphalt with a violence that seemed to come from a place of personal anger rather than professional duty. The sound of Jaden's body hitting the ground was like a gunshot in the quiet afternoon. Children screamed. "Misses." Chen dropped her purse, her hands flying to her mouth. And somewhere in the distance, cell phones began to appear, their cameras capturing every second of what was about to become a viral moment that would shake the community to its core. "Please. I didn't do anything." Jaden's voice was muffled against the asphalt, his words punctuated by the kind of sobs that come from deep confusion and terror. "I just want to go home." Officer Hawkins pressed her knee harder into his back, her radio crackling with static as she called for backup. "I've got a juvenile suspect resisting arrest at Riverside Elementary, requesting additional units." The word "suspect" rang out like a bell, transforming an 11-year-old boy playing tag into a criminal in the span of a sentence. "Mrs." Chen found her voice again, stepping closer despite the officer's earlier warning. "This is wrong. This child has done nothing. You're hurting him." By now, other adults had begun to gather. Parents who had been walking home from work, neighbors who had heard the commotion, and the after-school care workers who had been supervising the playground from inside the building. The crowd grew larger by the minute, their voices rising in a chorus of disbelief and outrage. Among them was David Martinez, a father of 3 who worked as a paralegal downtown. He had his phone out, recording everything, his hands shaking with anger as he watched an officer of the law treating a child like a dangerous criminal. "This is being recorded," he called out. "Everyone can see what you're doing. Sir, I'm going to need you to back up and put that phone away, or you'll be next." Officer Hawkins replied, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had grown accustomed to intimidating civilians into compliance. But David didn't back down. Neither did the growing crowd of neighbors who had witnessed too many injustices to remain silent. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the local daycare, stepped forward with the kind of maternal authority that comes from years of protecting children. "Officer, I've been watching these children play for the past hour. They were doing nothing wrong. This is excessive force on a child. Ma'am, unless you want to be arrested for interfering with a police investigation, I suggest you step back and let me do my job." The standoff continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Jaden remained pressed against the asphalt, his small body trembling with each sob. His friends stood in a tight cluster, some crying, others staring in shock at the scene unfolding before them. The sound of sirens in the distance announced the arrival of backup, but also something else, the approach of Jaden's family. Keisha Williams had been at the grocery store when her phone exploded with calls and text messages. "They got Jaden at the playground. Police got your boy. Come quick." She dropped her shopping basket and ran the 6 blocks to the school, her heart pounding with the kind of maternal terror that transforms ordinary women into forces of nature. She arrived just as the backup officers were pulling up, their cars surrounding the playground like a military operation. The sight of her son on the ground, beneath the weight of a grown woman in uniform, transformed her fear into rage. "Get off my son!" she screamed, pushing through the crowd with the desperation of a mother protecting her child. What is wrong with you people? He's 11 years old." Officer Hawkins looked up at the approaching woman with the kind of cold calculation that suggested she had been expecting this moment. "Ma'am, your son was exhibiting aggressive behavior and resisting arrest. He's being detained for his own safety and the safety of others." Resisting arrest. He's a child playing tag. Are you out of your mind? The backup officers stepped out of their vehicles, their hands resting on their weapons in a display of force that seemed designed more to intimidate than to protect. The crowd of neighbors grew quiet, recognizing the shift in dynamics that comes when a situation moves from excessive to potentially deadly. But Keisha Williams was not intimidated. She was a registered nurse who had worked the night shift at Memorial Hospital for 8 years. A single mother who had raised her son to be respectful and kind. And a woman who had seen enough injustice in her life to know when to stand up and fight. "I want to see your supervisor," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "I want to file a complaint, and I want my son released immediately. Your son will be released when I'm satisfied that he's not a threat to public safety." The words hung in the air like a challenge. A threat to public safety. An 11-year-old boy who had been playing tag with his friends, who still had grass stains on his knees from recess, who had never been in trouble at school, was now being classified as a danger to the community. That's when David Martinez made the call that would change everything. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for: Dorothy Williams, Jaden's grandmother, the woman who had once stood beside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, who had been arrested 17 times during the Civil Rights Movement, who had dedicated her life to fighting exactly this kind of injustice. "Mrs. Williams, this is David Martinez from the neighborhood. You need to get to Riverside Elementary right now. They've got Jaden on the ground. And it's bad." Dorothy Williams was 78 years old, but her voice still carried the power that had once filled auditoriums and inspired thousands. "I'm on my way. Don't let them move him. Don't let them take him anywhere. And make sure everyone keeps recording." She hung up the phone and reached for her keys, her mind already working through the legal and political implications of what was happening. She had hoped that her grandson would grow up in a world where his skin color wouldn't make him a target, where his childhood would be protected from the kind of violence she had fought against for decades. But some battles, it seemed, had to be fought by each generation. Back at the playground, Officer Hawkins was growing increasingly agitated by the crowd's refusal to disperse. The backup officers had formed a loose perimeter, but they seemed uncomfortable with the situation, their body language suggesting they weren't entirely sure about the appropriateness of their colleagues' actions. "I'm going to count to 10, Officer Hawkins announced to the crowd. "If you're not gone by then, you'll all be arrested for interfering with a police investigation." But the crowd didn't move. If anything, it grew larger as word spread through the neighborhood via social media and text messages. Parents arrived to collect their children, saw what was happening, and stayed to bear witness. Teenagers on their way home from school stopped to record videos. Even some of the shop owners from the commercial district had closed their businesses early to come see what was causing such a commotion. Mrs. Chen, who had been quietly observing the entire scene, finally spoke up with the kind of authority that comes from years of watching a community grow and change. "Officer, I've lived in this neighborhood for 37 years. I've seen this boy grow up. He's not a criminal. He's a child. And what you're doing to him is wrong. Ma'am, I don't care how long you've lived here. The law is the law. And this child broke it." "What law?" Mrs. Chen asked, her voice rising with indignation. "What law says a child can't play tag at a playground? What law says you can use force on an 11-year-old boy who was just having fun with his friends?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, because there was no good answer. Everyone present knew that what they were witnessing had nothing to do with law enforcement and everything to do with power, prejudice, and the kind of institutional violence that had plagued communities like this one for generations. That's when the black sedan pulled up to the curb, its engine purring with the quiet confidence of a vehicle that had seen many battles. Dorothy Williams emerged from the driver's seat with the kind of presence that made everyone in the vicinity take notice. She was small in stature, but enormous in authority. Her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her eyes sharp with the intelligence that had made her one of the most respected civil rights leaders in the country. She walked through the crowd with purpose, her cane tapping rhythmically against the pavement. People stepped aside, not out of fear, but out of respect. Even the backup officers seemed to recognize that something fundamental had shifted in the dynamics of the situation. "Get your hands off my grandson." Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of decades of fighting injustice. Officer Hawkins looked up from where she still knelt on Jaden's back, her eyes meeting those of the woman who had once stared down police dogs and fire hoses, who had been tear-gassed and beaten, who had never backed down from a fight when children were at stake. "Ma'am, this is a police matter. You need to step back." Dorothy Williams smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had heard those words before, who had been told to step back and stay quiet, and let the authorities handle things. It was the smile of someone who had never complied with such requests, and wasn't about to start now. "Officer, my name is Dorothy Williams. Perhaps you've heard of me." The recognition was immediate and uncomfortable. Officer Hawkins had indeed heard of Dorothy Williams. Everyone in law enforcement had heard of Dorothy Williams. She was the woman who had successfully sued 3 police departments for civil rights violations, who had testified before Congress about police brutality, who had been featured on the cover of Time magazine as one of the most influential civil rights leaders of the modern era. I don't care who you are. This child was resisting arrest. Arrest for what? Playing tag, being 11 years old, being black. The last question cut through the afternoon air like a blade. Everyone present knew that was the real issue, the unspoken truth that had been driving this entire confrontation. Jaden wasn't being treated like a criminal because of anything he had done. He was being treated like a criminal because of who he was. Dorothy Williams pulled out her phone, her fingers moving with surprising speed as she began to make calls. "Angela, it's Dorothy. I need you to get down to Riverside Elementary right now. Bring a camera crew and call the ACLU. We've got a situation." She hung up and immediately dialed another number. "Chief Morrison, this is Dorothy Williams. You have one of your officers assaulting my grandson at a playground. I strongly suggest you get down here before this becomes a national news story." The effect was immediate. Officer Hawkins's radio crackled to life with urgent messages from dispatch. The backup officers began to look nervous, their earlier confidence replaced by the kind of anxiety that comes when a situation spirals beyond their control. "Grandma Dorothy." Jaden's voice was small and scared, but filled with hope. He had heard his grandmother's voice and knew that help had arrived. "I'm here, baby. Everything's going to be okay." Dorothy Williams approached the officer, who still knelt on her grandson's back, her cane tapping against the asphalt with each step. "Officer, you have exactly 30 seconds to release my grandson before I file federal charges against you, your department, and this city." "I've done it before, and I'll do it again." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm promising you. I have the ACLU on speed dial, contacts at every major news network, and a legal team that specializes in civil rights violations. You're about to become very famous. Officer Hawkins. The question is whether you want to be famous for brutality or for doing the right thing." The standoff continued for another tense moment. But everyone present could see that the balance of power had shifted. Officer Hawkins was no longer dealing with a frightened child and concerned neighbors. She was facing a woman who had spent decades fighting exactly this kind of injustice, who had the resources and connections to turn a local incident into a national crisis. Slowly, reluctantly, Officer Hawkins released her hold on Jaden and stepped back. The boy scrambled to his feet, his clothes torn and dirty, his face streaked with tears and playground dirt. He ran to his grandmother, who enveloped him in a protective embrace. "Are you hurt, baby?" "My back hurts, and my hands are all scraped up," Jaden said, his voice still shaking. "I didn't do anything wrong, Grandma. I was just playing tag." "I know, sweetheart. I know." Dorothy Williams looked up at the gathering crowd, her eyes taking in the faces of neighbors who had witnessed the entire incident. "I want everyone who saw what happened here to give me their contact information. We're going to need witnesses." The response was immediate and overwhelming. David Martinez stepped forward first, followed by Mrs. Chen, Mrs. Patterson, and dozens of others. Even some of the backup officers looked uncomfortable with what they had witnessed, their professional training conflicting with their personal sense of right and wrong. Within minutes, the news crews began arriving. Angela Morrison from Channel 7 was the first, her camera operator already filming as she approached Dorothy Williams for an interview. The local NBC affiliate followed, then CNN, then reporters from newspapers throughout the region. "Mrs. Williams, can you tell us what happened here today?" Dorothy Williams looked directly into the camera, her voice steady and strong. "What happened here today is what has been happening in communities across America for generations. A child was criminalized for being black. He was assaulted by an officer of the law for playing tag with his friends. This is not about law enforcement. This is about racism, pure and simple." The interview continued for several minutes, with Dorothy Williams providing the kind of articulate, passionate commentary that had made her a respected voice in the civil rights movement. She spoke about systemic racism, about the school-to-prison pipeline, about the way black children are robbed of their innocence by a society that sees them as threats rather than treasures. Meanwhile, Officer Hawkins and her backup had retreated to their vehicles, their radios crackling with increasingly urgent messages from their superiors. The situation had escalated far beyond anything they had anticipated, and it was clear that there would be consequences for everyone involved. Chief Morrison arrived on the scene about an hour later, his face grim with the knowledge that his department was about to face a very public and very expensive lawsuit. He approached Dorothy Williams with the kind of cautious respect that law enforcement officials reserve for people who can end careers with a single phone call. "Mrs. Williams, I want to apologize for what happened here today. This is not the kind of policing we strive for in our department. Chief Morrison, apologies are not enough. This officer assaulted my grandson. She traumatized him and every other child who witnessed her actions. She needs to be held accountable. I understand your concerns, and I can assure you that there will be a full investigation." "No, Chief. There will be more than an investigation. There will be charges filed, both criminal and civil. There will be policy changes to prevent this from happening again. And there will be consequences for every person in your department who thinks it's acceptable to treat children this way." The confrontation between Dorothy Williams and Chief Morrison was civil, but charged with tension. Everyone present understood that this was more than just a conversation between two individuals. It was a negotiation between the forces of justice and the institutions that had allowed injustice to flourish for so long. Over the following days, the incident at Riverside Elementary became a national news story. The video footage shot by David Martinez and others spread across social media platforms, generating millions of views and sparking conversations about police reform, racial justice, and the treatment of children in American society. Dorothy Williams appeared on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, using each interview as an opportunity to educate the public about the broader issues at stake. She spoke about the history of civil rights in America, the ongoing struggle for equality, and the importance of holding institutions accountable for their actions. "This is not just about my grandson," she said during one particularly powerful interview. "This is about every black child in America who has been made to feel like a criminal for simply existing. We cannot allow this to continue." The legal proceedings began almost immediately. Dorothy Williams's team of lawyers filed both criminal charges against Officer Hawkins and a civil lawsuit against the police department and the city. The evidence was overwhelming: dozens of witnesses, multiple video recordings, and a clear pattern of excessive force against a child who had done nothing wrong. But the real power of Dorothy Williams' response wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the way she mobilized the community. Within a week of the incident, she had organized a rally at City Hall that drew thousands of people from across the region. Parents brought their children, teachers came with their students, and community leaders from every background imaginable showed up to demand justice. The rally was a masterclass in civil rights organizing. Dorothy Williams spoke with the kind of passion that had once moved mountains, her voice carrying across the crowd as she called for systemic change. "We are not here just to protest," she declared. "We are here to demand transformation. We are here to say that our children deserve better." Jaden himself spoke at the rally, his small voice amplified by the microphone, but made powerful by the truth of his experience. "I was just playing tag with my friends," he said, his words simple but profound. "I don't understand why that was wrong. I don't understand why she hurt me." The crowd's response was immediate and emotional. Parents wept as they imagined their own children in Jaden's position. Teachers thought about the students they worked to protect every day. Community leaders recognized the moment as a turning point in their ongoing struggle for justice. The political response was swift and significant. The mayor announced a comprehensive review of police policies regarding interactions with minors. The city council voted to establish a civilian oversight board for the police department. The school district implemented new protocols for handling law enforcement on school property. But perhaps the most meaningful change came from within the police department itself. Several officers who had witnessed the incident came forward to testify about the culture of aggression and racial bias that had been allowed to flourish under previous leadership. They spoke about the need for better training, more accountability, and a fundamental shift in how law enforcement approached community relations. Officer Hawkins was suspended pending the outcome of the investigation, but everyone involved knew that suspension was just the beginning. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and the public pressure for accountability was too strong to ignore. 3 months after the incident, Officer Hawkins was formally terminated from the police department and charged with assault on a minor. The civil lawsuit resulted in a substantial settlement that would help fund community programs aimed at preventing similar incidents in the future. But the most significant outcome was the change in the community itself. The incident had awakened a sense of collective responsibility that had been dormant for too long. Neighbors who had never spoken before began organizing block parties and community meetings. Parents became more involved in their children's schools. Local businesses started supporting youth programs and community initiatives. The playground at Riverside Elementary became a symbol of transformation. The city voted to renovate the entire facility, installing new equipment and creating a memorial garden dedicated to the ongoing struggle for civil rights. Most significantly, they renamed the playground in honor of Jaden Williams, recognizing him as a symbol of resilience and hope. At the dedication ceremony, Dorothy Williams stood before another crowd of supporters, her grandson beside her, both of them looking out at a community that had been fundamentally changed by their courage to stand up for justice. "This playground will serve as a reminder," she said, "that children should be allowed to play, to laugh, to grow up without fear. It will remind us that when we stand together, we can overcome any injustice." Jaden stepped up to the microphone, no longer the frightened child who had been pinned to the asphalt months earlier. He had grown taller, his voice had grown stronger, and his understanding of the world had deepened in ways that no 11-year-old should have to experience. "I want every kid to feel safe when they come here to play," he said. "I want them to know that they matter, that they're protected, and that there are people who will fight for them if they need it." The crowd erupted in applause. But it wasn't just celebration. It was affirmation of a commitment to continue the work that Dorothy Williams had begun decades earlier, that her grandson had unwittingly advanced, and that the community had embraced as their own responsibility. As the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, Dorothy Williams watched her grandson run toward the new playground equipment with his friends. They were playing tag again, their laughter carrying on the wind, just as it had that day when everything changed. But now their play was protected by something more powerful than any fence or security system. It was protected by a community that had learned to stand up for its children, to fight for justice, and to never again allow injustice to flourish in silence. The story of what happened at Riverside Elementary that autumn afternoon became part of the community's history, passed down from parent to child, from teacher to student, from neighbor to neighbor. It served as a reminder that justice is not a destination, but a journey, not a guarantee, but a responsibility, and not the work of individuals, but the collective duty of everyone who believes that children deserve to grow up in a world where their skin color doesn't determine their treatment. Years later, when Jaden Williams graduated from high school as valedictorian, when he earned a scholarship to study civil rights law, when he returned to the community to continue the work his grandmother had started, people would point to that day at the playground as the moment when everything changed. Not just for him, not just for his family, but for an entire community that had learned the power of standing together when justice calls. The playground that now bears his name continues to echo with the sounds of children at play, their laughter a testament to the belief that every child deserves to grow up free from fear, free from prejudice, and free to simply be a child. And in that laughter, in that freedom, in that simple joy of childhood preserved, the true victory of that difficult day lives on. Dorothy Williams, now in her 80s, still visits the playground regularly, watching new generations of children play tag and hide and seek, their voices carrying the same joy that had filled the air that day when injustice tried to silence them. She knows that the work is never finished, that each generation must learn anew the importance of standing up for what is right. But she also knows that they have planted seeds that will continue to grow, that they have lit flames that will continue to burn, and that they have proven once again that when good people stand together, justice will always find a way to prevail. The lesson of Riverside Elementary lives on in every child who plays there, in every parent who watches over them, in every community member who remembers that protecting children is not just a responsibility, but a sacred duty. It lives on in the knowledge that one person's courage to stand up can inspire a community to rise up, and that sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin with the simplest acts of justice. In the end, the story of Jaden Williams and the playground that bears his name is not just about one incident, or one family, or one community. It is about the ongoing struggle for justice in America, about the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change, and about the unshakable belief that every child deserves to grow up in a world where their humanity is recognized, their dignity is protected, and their future is bright with possibility.